Welcome back. We're pleased to be joined by Congressman Thad McCotter.
Congressman, welcome. Damn, all right. Thanks for coming. You heard General Petraeus' report this week, and you heard the president last night. What's your assessment of where we're at in Iraq and what it's going to take to wrap this thing up?
Well, the assessment that I've been advocating for over 4 years to the administration was to go into a counterinsurgency mode, unleash liberty from the grassroots, and let it evolve into its own national form. Instead, they tried to impose a democratic structure upon a system that the people did not like because they felt they had been excluded from it. There was no reconstruction at the local level. I mean, it was very disappointing that people had not learned the lessons that President Truman in the reconstruction of Germany and Japan had understood as a former Jackson County judge, is that there must be a transactional gain in prosperity to people to accompany the transformational change to democracy. What we've done now is that has shifted. The surge was done because the insurgency got out of control to the point where we could not run a traditional counterinsurgency by putting in training and advisors to live amongst the Iraqi troops and the population. The surge was to give the breathing room, I believe, not only to the national government, but more importantly, to then bring the reconstruction teams, the provincial reconstruction teams, into the tribal areas, into the towns, with the security there so that you could then create the building blocks of liberty upon which you will have a free, stable Iraq opposed to terrorism. Had this been done in the beginning, and had the Iranian influence, which I also warned about, been taken fully into account, we would not be having this conversation, and you two would have had a much more pleasant conversation to start your show. The reality now is that this will take time. I agree that the patience of the American people has been sorely tried by this administration. I've never made any apologies for the way that they have done this. I've addressed it and I've criticized it in a constructive fashion. But now that we are at the point we're at, you will continue to see, as the local stability occurs, just as in America, just as in our founding, and just as Republicans found out, if the public at home isn't with you, you will no longer be in power.
That's right.
Is local reconciliation precedes, facilitates, and ultimately dictates national reconciliation. As a practical matter, it would be impossible for the national parliament in Iraq to be able to pass anything to get it done if there is not support at the local tribal level.
Well, Congressman, in terms of the surge, how much time do you think the administration has for that to work and for this political process that you're describing to take hold? I mean, you said patience are running out. I think we both agree on that.
But that's exactly what is required.
But how do but the problem is the American people are running out of patience. Your colleagues, the Republicans, are as frustrated, many of them, not as many Democrats. How do you convince the American people? What's the next step? What is our way out of this mess?
Well, two things. One is to continue the process of the local reconciliation and continue to keep the diplomatic initiatives on the regional partners in the area that are supportive of seeing a free, stable Iraq opposed to terrorism, and to make sure that the national parliament is continually pressed. But it is a pressure from the locals that will have the most distinct influence upon them. This will take time. Traditional counterinsurgencies, which we were not performing, and traditional reconstruction, which we were not performing for the last 3.5 years, or 4 until Petraeus came there, is going to take time to occur. But what Americans can monitor, because of the noxious atmosphere of both parties in this, is as you watch the towns and the tribes begin to continue the path towards evolving their liberty, you will start to see American troops come home, because you do not want a large military presence in a traditional counterinsurgency. It becomes counterproductive.
But that's not what Americans are going to see and hear. What Americans are going to see and hear over the next year is a whole lot of finger pointing and a lot of what we had last week, where even before the report came out, it was being condemned. What role does that atmosphere in Washington play in our ability to carry this thing forward?
I had an interesting article that I wrote where you have the spectacle of a Congress with an 86% disapproval rating from a poll with a margin of error of 14%, yelling at an Iraqi parliament that nobody likes either. I refer to it as the battle of the bums. Now, what our bums, like me, have to understand is the American public wants adult leadership in this situation. They know when politicians are exploiting it on either side of the aisle, and I think that is their largest frustration, is that the greatest periods of crisis in American history, you did have adult supervision over Washington. And they are increasingly saying that is not occurring now, and it's causing an enormous amount of disgruntlement in the populace, and rightly so. Most people understand that we have to win in this, because the consequences of defeat will be the war without end.
What's your definition of adult supervision in Washington? How would you get what you see missing right now?
Well, one of the things that I find frustrating is no one seems to understand what the change in policy was between what we were doing prior to Petraeus and post Petraeus, and then what is required. I can understand the frustration of people who the president does not articulate this well. The president has screwed up in the past, and so they get the sense that since you screwed up enough, you're not going to be able to do it. And then the people who do nothing but criticize you without putting forward a constructive alternative are just as bad, and we're stuck in the middle of this thing.
Meanwhile, Congressman, and we'll let you go after this question, but meanwhile, you and other Republicans are going to have to face those voters next fall in 08. What message will you bring, and do you expect a repeat of the bloodbath of 06?
Well, there's a lot of time in between. I always have to face the electorate every time I decide to run. Some of us, we run on our record. If they like it, they like it. They don't, they don't. At the national level, one thing you find is you have less control over your fate because you can get swept up in national forces, even at the local district level. But I do want to return to one thing about Iraq that I think everybody needs to answer. We have offered the Iraqi people our word that we will bring liberty to Iraq. We will free them. That was a bipartisan word given at the time. If the United States does not keep its word to bring liberty to the Iraqi people, what fundamental principle will we offer them to turn them away from extremists and towards us in the future? I don't think they want a free trade agreement.
That's a good question, Congressman. We're out of time. We appreciate you coming. Good luck down there, and we'll bring you back soon.
He's doing a good job in leadership, Republican leadership, and you've got a lot of insights.
Excellent.
So we hope you'll share it.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.